The rain had swallowed the entire small town. In the chaos, a single mother waded waist-deep through the floodwaters, gripping the arm of a stranger. She didn't know then. The man clinging to her was the father of a Hell's Angel, and her act of kindness would resonate louder than any storm. Before starting this story, tell us where in the world you're watching from. Also, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us bring you more inspiring stories every day. The town of Maple Hollow was usually quiet, a place of church bells and neighborhood stores. But when the river overflowed its banks after 3 days of relentless rain, the streets turned into rivers and houses became islands. Rachel Garner, 34 years old, tightened her grip on her 8-year-old son, Evan, as they rushed to the second floor of their modest home. She was a single mother working 2 jobs, barely keeping life afloat even before the storm. Now water was seeping through her floor, and the sound of neighbors screaming spread through the darkness. Rachel wrapped Evan in blankets, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. But then she saw him, a frail old man struggling in the current in front of her window, clinging to a fence post, his face twisted with terror. Something in Rachel surged. She handed a flashlight to Evan and launched herself into the swirling flood, her heart pounding. She didn't stop to think. She only thought, nobody dies tonight if I can help it. The water was freezing, pulling on her legs like hands. Rachel pushed forward, teeth clenched until she reached the man. He coughed, sputtering, his voice. Can hold on. Rachel put an arm around him. I've got you. Inch by inch, she dragged him toward the house. The current fought back, but determination burned stronger than fear. Evan leaned from the window, calling, Mom, hurry. With one last effort, she got the man up onto her porch, collapsing beside him. He was pale, trembling, but alive. She wrapped him in a blanket, pressing a cup of tea into his shaking hands. Once the storm had calmed enough to use her stove, he introduced himself through gasping breaths. My name is Walter Holt. Thank you, ma'am. Rachel smiled weakly, pushing wet hair from her face. She didn't ask more. Who he was didn't matter. What mattered was that a man who would have drowned had been pulled from the water. What she didn't know was that Walter's name carried weight far beyond Maple Hollow. 2 days later, the water receded, leaving mud, debris, and broken fences behind. Rachel walked Evan to school, both exhausted, but grateful that their house still stood. Walter, now resting with his relatives, had insisted she take his phone number. She didn't think about it, slipping it into her pocket with a polite nod. Life slowly returned. Neighbors repairing porches, sharing stories of loss and survival. Rachel never expected thanks. She had acted because it was the only thing her heart could allow. But that evening, as she swept mud from her porch, she noticed a line of black motorcycles rolling slowly down Maple Hollow's main road, the chrome gleaming in the setting sun, and the sound of engines rumbling like distant thunder. Evan's eyes widened. Mom, who are they? Rachel froze, broom in hand, as the motorcycles parked right in front of her yard. 100 bikers dismounted in unison. At the front stood an imposing man with a leather vest. His eyes searched for her. The leader stepped forward, his presence imposing but strangely calm. He removed his helmet, revealing weathered features and piercing eyes that softened when they settled on Rachel. You're Rachel Garner? She nodded slowly, pulling Evan closer. Yes. The man extended his hand. My name is Derek Holt. Walter is my father. Rachel blinked in shock. Your father? He's fine. Derek's voice broke slightly. He's alive because of you. He turned, gesturing to the line of bikers behind him. We don't forget debts like that. Evan squeezed Rachel's arm, whispering, Mom, they look scary. Derek crouched slightly, his voice becoming soft as he looked at Evan. Scary is what we look like to the bad guys. For good people like you and your mom, we're just family. The engines idled, the street buzzing with power, neighbors peeking from windows. Rachel felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from the weight of something she couldn't yet name. Protection. The news spread through Maple Hollow faster than a wildfire. 100 Hell's Angels parked in front of Rachel Garner's house. Some whispered in fear, others in respect. Rachel stepped onto the porch facing Derek, her voice trembling. Why are you here? He met her eyes with firm resolve. Because you saved my father, and because no one should stand alone after this kind of storm. He looked around the street, raising his voice so the neighbors could hear. This woman is under our watch now. Anyone who has a problem can bring it to us. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rachel felt her cheeks burn, torn between gratitude and disbelief. She had acted out of simple humanity. Now her small act resonated like thunder. Evan tugged her sleeve, whispering, "They're like angels on motorcycles, Mom." She smiled, weakly, pulling him close. And for the first time since the flood, Rachel realized she wasn't just surviving. She was surrounded. She was protected. She was no longer alone. The next morning, Maple Hollow buzzed like never before. At the diner, voices clashed around steaming cups of coffee. Rachel Garner with bikers on her lawn. One woman scoffed. Another leaned forward, lowering her voice. She saved a man's life. That counts for something. Rachel felt the stares when she walked through town with Evan, whispers trailing like shadows. At the grocery store, an old friend turned away, but the cashier slipped an extra loaf of bread into her bag, whispering, "For you and the boy." That evening, as Rachel scrubbed mud from her porch, the angels remained parked at the end of her street, engines silent, but presence strong. Derek approached, offering her a nod. "We'll stay until things settle down." Rachel frowned. "You don't need to do that." Derek interrupted her gently. "We don't walk away from people who save our own." Rachel looked at him, realizing this wasn't charity. It was family, just one she had never asked for. Not everyone welcomed the sight of leather and chrome in Maple Hollow. At the council meeting, murmurs rose. "They're going to bring trouble. Our children don't need outlaws in town." Yet no one could deny what they had seen. Rachel's porch intact, her neighbors safer than ever. Evan, curious, ventured outside one afternoon to see the row of motorcycles. An angel lifted him onto a Harley, his eyes lighting up as he gripped the handlebars. Rachel rushed outside, panic bursting, but stopped when she saw her son's smile. The biker laughed. "Don't worry, ma'am. He's just trying out dreams." Rachel couldn't help but smile. Later, Derek approached quietly. "People will talk. Let them. Those worth keeping will see the truth." She met his gaze, surprised by the calm wisdom behind the rough exterior. Slowly, she began to understand. Their presence wasn't about fear. It was about sending a message. Those who stand up for others don't stand alone. A week later, as cleanup crews worked through Maple Hollow, Rachel joined volunteers stacking sandbags. Sweat ran down her forehead, but she kept going. Some neighbors avoided her gaze. Others offered silent thanks. When her arms trembled, one of the angels, massive, tattooed, took the bag from her hands with surprising gentleness. "We've got this, ma'am." That evening, she came home to find fresh groceries neatly stacked on her porch. No note, no explanation. Derek appeared later, leaning against the railing. "Some brothers thought you might need a break." Rachel shook her head, half laughing. "I'm not used to help." Derek's expression softened. "Neither are we. That's why we pay it back 10 times over." Rachel sat on the step. Evan snuggled beside her. For the first time since the flood, she didn't feel like she was carrying the world on her shoulders. The angel's loyalty wasn't just loud. It was steady, silent, woven into every act of kindness. But shadows lingered. One evening, as Rachel closed the curtains, she caught sight of two unfamiliar men across the street watching. They weren't from town. She recognized the swagger, the same kind of threat that had always preyed on the vulnerable. Before panic could rise, the engines roared to life. The angels moved forward from the corner, their silhouettes sharp in the streetlight. The strangers melted into the night without a word. Evan, frightened, asked, "Mom, are they bad guys?" Rachel knelt, covering his cheek. "Bad guys run when good men stand up." Derek came onto the porch later, his tone calm. "Not everyone is happy we're here. But no one touches you. Not as long as we're breathing." Rachel's heart tightened at the certainty in his voice. She hadn't realized until then. Saving Walter hadn't just spared one man. It had bound her family's fate to a brotherhood that wouldn't bend, wouldn't break, and wouldn't let evil near her door. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers in Maple Hollow changed. At the cafe, people said, "Maybe these bikers aren't what we thought." At church, an old woman patted Rachel's hand. "You did what was right. God doesn't choose the messengers, just the message." Rachel felt the tide turning. Evan brought home a drawing from school of himself on a Harley, a line of angels around their house. "It's our shield," he explained proudly. That night, Rachel sat with Derek on the porch. The quiet hum of motorcycles in the street. "I didn't save your father to get this," she whispered. Derek's gaze lingered on the horizon. That's why it matters. True kindness expects nothing in return, and that's the kind we ride for. The words sank deep into Rachel's heart. For the first time, she believed it. Her small act had become something bigger than her. Something that rippled through chrome, leather, and loyalty. The peace didn't last. One rainy evening, Rachel heard knocking at her door. She froze, Evan clinging to her leg. When she opened it, a man in a suit stood there, umbrella dripping. "Ma'am," he said softly, "my name is Victor Kane. Some of us don't like strangers bringing trouble to Maple Hollow. These bikers make business difficult." His smile was sharp, hostile. Rachel stiffened. "They only protected us." Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Protection has a cost. When they leave, and they will leave, you'll be the one left to pay the price." He tipped his hat and disappeared into the rain. Rachel's hands trembled. Later that night, she told Derek, his jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. "Kane isn't a neighbor. He has ties to crews that prey on towns like this." Rachel's fear turned to anger. "Why me?" Derek's voice was firm. "Because you proved that one person can change everything. And men like him hate that." The next day, Maple Hollow buzzed with rumors about Kane's threats. Some neighbors became distant, worried his words might be true. Rachel walked the stairs, carrying Evan's lunchbox to school. On the way back, she found Derek waiting on her porch. "We need to show them," he said quietly. "Show who?" she asked. He nodded toward the town square. Hours later, engines thundered through Maple Hollow. 100 Harleys lined the streets, vests gleaming, heavy boots on the sidewalk. At the center stood Rachel, holding Evan's hand. Derek raised his voice sharp as steel. "This woman saved one of our own. And now anyone who threatens her threatens all of us." The crowd gasped, whispers rippling. Rachel felt exposed, her cheeks burning. But when she looked at Evan, smiling proudly, she realized something. This was no longer just her fight. It belonged to everyone who believed that loyalty mattered more than fear. Kane fought back. Late one night, stones shattered Rachel's windows. Evan screamed as glass rained on the floor. Rachel shielded him with her arms, her heart pounding. By the time she looked outside, a dark car sped away. Within minutes, the roar of Harleys filled the street. The angels swept onto her lawn, weapons ready. Derek pushed through them, eyes fierce. "Are you hurt?" Rachel shook her head, clutching Evan. Anger trembled in her voice. "They went after my son." Derek's hand pressed gently on her shoulder. Then they just made it personal. The angels deployed, engines roaring, chasing the trail into the night. Rachel sat on the porch, tears flowing silently. Evan leaned against her, whispering. "They came fast. Mom, they're always there." She held him tight. For the first time in years, she realized she didn't feel helpless. With each roar of engines in the distance, she felt safer, stronger, and less alone. The next morning, sunlight spread over Maple Hollow, sparkling on the broken glass. Rachel expected whispers of pity, but instead found baskets of food, tools, and blankets left on her porch by neighbors. Slowly, the town was changing, seeing her not as a victim, but as a symbol. At the street's edge, the angels stood tall, leather gleaming, silent and unwavering. Derek approached, a rare smile tugging his lips. "Kane thought he could scare you. Instead, he woke this town up." Rachel looked at the offerings with wide eyes. "I don't deserve this." Derek shook his head firmly. "You earned it the night you pulled my father from the flood." Sometimes one act of courage lights a fire that no one can extinguish. Rachel swallowed hard, feeling her chest swell with something new. Not fear, not burden, pride. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was carrying a torch that others had started to follow. The final confrontation came a few days later. Kane arrived in Maple Hollow with a convoy of men, their cars blocking the main street. He stepped out, voice booming. "This ends now. No woman and her biker pets will ruin my business." Before Rachel could react, the engines thundered. The angels swept in, 100 strong, surrounding the cars in a circle of chrome and steel. Derek dismounted, his boots echoing against the asphalt. "You don't scare her. And you certainly don't scare us." The angels revved in unison. A wall of sound that shook the windows and made Kane's men tremble until their bravado cracked. Rachel stood on the hardware store steps. Evan's hand in hers, voice firm. "You're wrong, Kane. Fear doesn't run this town anymore." The crowd erupted in cheers, neighbors coming out onto the sidewalks, openly siding with her. Kane's smirk faded as his men retreated, swallowed by the roar of the engines. Maple Hollow had chosen, and it wasn't him. When Kane's convoy disappeared over the horizon, silence lingered for a heartbeat. Then applause erupted, spreading through Maple Hollow like fire through dry grass. Children clapped. Old men cheered. Women shouted their gratitude. Rachel stood frozen. Evan pressed against her side, tears gleaming in her eyes. Derek approached slowly, removing his vest and holding it high. The angels roared their engines, saluting Rachel as if she were one of their own. Her chest tightened, overwhelmed. Neighbors began to step forward, offering hugs, shaking her hand, thanking her aloud. For years, she had been invisible, just a single mother fighting through each day unnoticed. Now she was something else, a symbol of courage, a reminder of what loyalty could build. As the angels climbed back onto their motorcycles, Derek leaned close. You gave life to my father. Tonight, you gave this town its backbone. Don't forget that. Rachel nodded, whispering, I won't forget. For the first time, she truly believed it. Life in Maple Hollow slowly returned to rhythm, but the rhythm felt different. At the diner, people no longer whispered. They greeted Rachel warmly, buying sundaes for Evan, thanking her publicly. The grocery store cashier, who once looked away, now asked her advice about rebuilding his flooded basement. Rachel noticed the change most in Evan. He walked taller, smiled brighter, and no longer flinched at shadows in front of the window. They're still there, Mom, he said one evening, drawing rows of motorcycles in his notebook. Rachel smiled softly. Maybe not parked outside. But yes, they'll always be there. She still glimpsed chrome from time to time, motorcycles idling at the edge of town, men nodding as they passed her house. They no longer constantly stood guard, but their presence lingered steady as a promise. For Rachel, the flood had nearly drowned her world. But from it, she had gained something unexpected. Not just protection, but a new kind of family. One crisp Saturday morning, Rachel received a call. Walter Holt's voice cracked with age, but carried warmth. You saved me that night, and I wanted to see you again. She drove Evan to the neighboring town where Walter lived. When they arrived, he hugged her with surprising strength. My boy told me what you did here, said Walter, eyes moist. You didn't just pull me from the water. You brought my son's faith to the surface. Derek appeared then, silently nodding to his father. Evan rushed forward, asking Walter to tell flood stories again. As the old man laughed, Rachel watched Derek watch his father, and she realized this story was bigger than her. Her single act of kindness had healed wounds she had never seen, between father and son, between bikers and a town, between fear and courage. And it struck her, kindness, when carried far enough, can ripple into places that even storms can't touch. Months later, Maple Hollow held its annual harvest fair. For the first time since the flood, laughter rang out without interruption. Rachel held a small stand with Evan, selling homemade pies. Suddenly, the ground trembled, the familiar rumble of Harleys. Heads turned as dozens of angels entered town, chrome gleaming under golden leaves. This time, no one whispered in fear. Children ran forward, waving, cheering. Derek parked in the center, lifting Evan high on his shoulders. The fair erupted in applause as Rachel smiled, overwhelmed. The grisly banners were absent. This wasn't about claiming territory. It was about celebrating a bond forged in floodwaters and defended in fire. Derek placed a small leather patch on Rachel's stand, embroidered with 2 words, family first. She held it close, tears filling her eyes. For years, she had wondered if she and Evan belonged anywhere. That day, she knew the answer. They belonged here in courage, in loyalty, in the roar of engines that now felt like home. On a quiet autumn evening, Rachel tucked Evan into bed. Outside, the hum of engines drifted faintly through the hills, not near, but never far. She stepped onto the porch, the cool air filling her lungs. She touched the patch on her coat, remembering Derek's words, Walter's gratitude, and the sight of her neighbors applauding as the angels stood guard. She realized now that storms come to test, not to break, and sometimes kindness is the only bridge that carries people through. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, we're not alone anymore. A solitary Harley rumbled in the distance, its rider raising a hand in silent salute. Rachel returned the gesture, her heart steady. The flood had taken much, but it had given more. She was no longer just a single mother. She was proof that even the smallest act of humanity could summon an army of loyalty, and that truth would outlast any storm. When one act of kindness saved a man, loyalty transformed it into an unbreakable bond.